WNYC-TV presents About the Arts with Barbara Lee Diamonstein.
Welcome to About the Arts. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our guest today is art dealer Leo Castelli. It's doubtful that the art of the 60s would have looked quite the way that it did if Leo Castelli had not assembled his group of artists and promoted them into international prominence. He helped define a whole aesthetic period and confirm new boundaries for art. It was he who introduced the first flag paintings by Jasper Johns, the first shaped canvases by Frank Stella, and the first cartoon paintings of Roy Lichtenstein. He may not have written it, but he has certainly lived and helped make the history of modern art since he first opened his gallery just about 20 years ago now. Welcome to you, Leo. It's nice to have you here. What is the unique character of the Castelli Gallery? What makes your gallery different from others?
Well, I don't know whether it's so different from others. However, perhaps the idea that's behind it of not only buying and selling paintings or having a stable of painters, but to do a historical job, let's say. Well, taking up from, let's say, Sidney Janis stopped, that's the abstract expressionists, trying to find out what the new trends would be in American art. I'm limited to that. And try to discover these new trends, well, sooner than other people perhaps. Well, sometimes it's perhaps instinct and knowledge to some degree, but in most cases I suppose luck plays a good role in my choices and in whatever I find. So
it seems to me that luck appeared in the form of Robert Rauschenberg
luck
and
appeared
Jasper
in the
Johns.
form of Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. Well, Rauschenberg by himself perhaps would have not quite be sufficient, but the fact that those two actually appeared in my life at the same time was very significant. I had known Rauschenberg earlier than that.
How did you come to know them?
Well, it's a very complex and difficult thing to explain. They just happen. You live, of course, if you live at home, say on Fifth Avenue where I live, of course you won't find anybody. You have to live with, say, the previous generation of painters. I was very much involved with the abstract expressionists, de Kooning, Pollock, Rothko, Klein, whom I knew very well indeed, and saw practically every day down on 10th Street or at the Cedar Bar or at our club, which was founded back in '48.
What was the club?
Well, the club was a place where once a week we all got together and discussed weighty problems of art and also philosophical problems. For instance, as I remember in the late 40s and early 50s, I think that we got terribly interested in was Zen Buddhism of all things, you know. But anyway, problems of art especially, and we had various people who delivered speeches, and such as, for instance, Harold Rosenberg, who belonged to the group, matter of fact, but others who came from the outside. I remember Max Ernst coming to speak to us one day.
What did he talk about? And how did the interest in Zen affect art?
About surrealism, his experience, well, what he thought, where he thought we were going, what the meaning was of the new developments that he really did not perhaps understand so well. It was beyond him perhaps to understand this fresh movement, abstract expressionism. Younger people than he didn't understand it. Men like Matta, for instance, who was one of the young geniuses here right after the war.
And a close friend of yours at the time.
And a great friend of mine at that time. Well, had left the United States for various and very special reasons, which I won't go into, and then came back 3 years later, and just was amazed to see what was going on there. And I told him that it was very important, but he was condescending and said, well, it doesn't lack merit, but didn't understand it and went away.
If you were so involved with the abstract expressionists, how did you come to handle this whole new wave of artists?
Well, I was involved with them. Then after a while, well, the followers came up, whom I also knew. But in fact, that's a little bit how I discovered Jasper Johns, following the followers. The Jewish Museum back in '57 had a show of abstract expressionism, the second generation. And that show, that was also organized in part by Maya Shapiro, had all these people that I knew, like Al Leslie, also Rauschenberg, whom I had known for several years before, and Joan Mitchell, and many, many others. And by the time I already, apart from Rauschenberg, whom I'll mention later, these seemed to be, to me, people that were just repeating more or less the gestures of the great man who had actually invented this new trend. And there was nothing new that was really happening. They were pretty good, most of them, but no new genius that had something new to say appeared upon the scene. Well, and if the abstract expressionists played an important role during and after the war to express that kind of anguish that the war produced, the younger generation didn't have the same reasons. So I was looking for new people who would have something new to say in a new era that was beginning in the late, I would say in the middle, early and middle 50s, yeah.
Who defined the next movement as a pop art movement? Who coined that expression?
Well, that expression was actually coined by Lawrence Alloway, an English critic. Well, he coined it in England, actually, where a movement came up that before the pop art in New York, in America, which had some similarities, but only superficial ones, I would say. But then it was applied, because of those similarities, also to the American movement. And, well, anyway, actually, when I discovered Johns back in '57, that's right after the opening of my gallery on February 1st of that year, I discovered him at the Jewish Museum in a group show where all these followers of the abstract expressionist appeared. And he, well, of course, Rauschenberg stood out there quite, but I was familiar with his work anyway, so he did not surprise me. What surprised me really was a painting of this man whom I did not know, whose work I hadn't seen until then, called Jasper Johns. And when I saw it at a distance, I immediately went to see it, saw the name Jasper Johns, and was just amazed that it's something that was entirely new, that I had never seen before.
What was so new and fresh?
The new, well, I didn't know what it was actually. It was a fairly large 4 by 4 feet painting, done in wax, in encaustic. But I didn't know really that it was encaustic. For me, it was just a green painting that looked extraordinary, square.
That wonderful green of his.
And so, as luck would have it, 2 or 3 days later, I went to Jasper Johns' studio, helped by Rauschenberg, who just then had a studio above Jasper Johns, and I was amazed to see what Jasper Johns was doing there, the targets, the numbers, the flags, and that was really, well, the great revelation. Rauschenberg came more gradually, actually had seen a fantastic show of his where he did red paintings. All the paintings were actually done, the color of all the paintings was red, and that was at Egan's, who had just moved across the street and had made a deal with the Poindexter Gallery, and that was in all before Christmas of '53. And that was just an incredible show. Some of those paintings, well, are very, very famous now. One is at the Amsterdam Stedelijk Museum with Charlene, and then there's one at the San Francisco Museum. And there are perhaps some of the most valued work of Rauschenberg. So I knew about him, and I sort of had absorbed him gradually, but Jasper Johns was a real shock, something absolutely new.
What is the function of an art dealer? How does a Trieste-born businessman end up being, I guess, the greatest contemporary tastemaker, salesman since the days of Duveen?
Well, the function of an art dealer, well, can be various. Certainly, good art dealer, an art dealer who really cares for art and not about making money, should be to find new artists, make them known to the public before museums can do it. They function in a much more cumbersome way. They have to figure out schedules well ahead of time, and so we are the real vanguard, and if we are alert, we, the good dealers, we can just make things happen so much more rapidly than if we had to rely only on museums. The museums will then sometimes very rapidly, sometimes more slowly, judge what we are doing and go on from there.
Do you see your work as an impresario?
Well, I think that that's what I feel. I'm more than just somebody who wants to sell paintings. The selling of paintings seems to be a secondary thing. I have to, of course, sell them and to finance my activity. But the activity really is the important aim of my gallery. And I'm very happy to just tag along in the midst of tremendous financial difficulties, as long as I can keep the gallery going.
Well, is it just tag along? To what degree and extent does your aesthetic judgment influence the artists you've shown? Do these people come to you with their works, or is there some other process involved? Are you part of that process?
You mean to what degree do I influence the public at large?
The artists.
Oh, the artists. There is certainly some influence that any dealer has over the artists. It can be very passive, it can be very active. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it should be almost totally passive. The artist should not be influenced at all in what he's doing. I know about some galleries that try to influence the artist actively, in the sense that they want him to produce more, because more money.
More and more that is
more
sellable.
And more, let's say, paintings that have been sellable or easily sellable. That's then active influence, which I would be very much against. I just let the artists do what they want, and sometimes, of course, I do not agree at all with developments that occur, but well, they have just to occur. If
and you never express
the artist must not be disturbed, above all. But of course, you see them very often. You talk about what he's doing. You talk with other people what they're doing, and there is some influence that does occur.
You recently said that everything in painting and sculpture seems to have been explored. Perhaps you felt the same way in the 50s.
Well, one does feel that way all along. One cannot imagine what a new genius will develop.
Do you see any on the horizon? Is there anything new?
I would not say that I can see anything as specific as, say, as a Jasper Johns or a Lichtenstein, or, say, Judd of a later generation of the so-called minimal movement. But of course there are so many things that artists do, so many media that they use, like the tape, the videotape, and all kinds of materials, that it's very, very difficult to say what will emerge now from what's being done these days.
You've once said that you pick painters not only because they're good, but because they are leaders of a new movement. Do you see any new movements on the horizon? Or how would you characterize what you see now and ahead?
Well, what I would say is I would pick them only because they are leaders in some way of a new movement, I would not pick them just because they are good. That would not interest me. I don't see, as I said, nothing at the horizon that one could put one's finger on. I know that new media are explored, photography is used greatly, video, as I said, and out of that something incredibly interesting and new may occur in the hands of a great genius.
Do you see photography and video as art forms?
Of course, yes, sure. It's curious that photography has not been recognized as an art form for so long, although one, of course, knew some great photographers. You are dealing with Kertész now. He was one of those, Brassai and so on and so forth, Atget and the great Americans. But they were not really placed on the same level as painters or sculptors. I think that that happens now, that photography is placed on the same level. It's not.
How do you explain that change from what was formerly thought of as chemical, mechanical, duplicatable, with great emphasis on precision rather than expressionistic methods in the past?
Well, it's fairly easy to explain, really. Since artists, let's say, starting with way back, perhaps with Miro and Picasso, but more recently with Andy Warhol, say, or Lichtenstein, started to use
direct influence of
photographs and photographs of consumer goods. That aspect of art sort of then influence people to think, well, if the artists use photography, then why not the photographers themselves? So actually, I would say that one of the persons who's been very responsible for the great upsurge of photography is Andy Warhol, perhaps more than anybody else.
With his portraits?
Well, not his portraits alone, but his use of the photographic image in his paintings,
photographing people.
Starting photographing Marilyn Monroe and Jackie Kennedy and Elvis Presley and so on. Yeah, that was very influential, I would say. Then people began to say, well, these are just very banal photographs. Well, they're erected into an artistic product because they're handled in a special way by Andy Warhol. But then let's see what the photographs themselves are without the intervention of the artist's hand, as in the case of Warhol, and also, of course, to a very large degree by Rauschenberg.
And the step of the photorealists, too.
The photorealists really came later. The photorealists are an offshoot of pop art. They are not really, it's not an original movement. It's a movement that continues pop art, and I think, that's about the end of pop art there. I don't see any
Can we still call it pop art?
Well, pop art, it's not pop art really, because what they do, in a sense it is when they, for instance, do portraits of horses, of pickup trucks and so on. These are consumer objects, but then they go beyond that. They do portraits of one kind or another, like Chuck Close, who's a very good one, or just urban landscapes like Estes. I don't see where one can go from there, frankly. So there are some very fine artists in that area, but that's about the end of that vein that started with pop art.
Well, there are some new movements and physical movements too. You've just moved your gallery from its long-term Upper Madison Avenue, 77th Street home to Soho. Is that a trend? Why did you do that?
No, it's nothing of the kind. Actually, I didn't move the gallery. I've been down there in Soho for more than 5 years now. And I gave...
You had two galleries.
So the gallery uptown has existed now for almost 20 years. My 20th birthday will be on February 1st. But then I did open up the gallery downtown about 6 years ago. And actually, the two galleries always had equal billing. It's not that I favored the uptown gallery over the downtown gallery in any possible way. Some of the artists had to get used to it. Say people like Lichtenstein or Oldenburg or Kelly felt that perhaps it was better to show uptown rather than downtown. They considered it not so good, but they all got used to it, so that I have had shows of all my major artists, excluding Jasper Johns, downtown. There is a show of Oldenburg down there now, and a really quite marvelous one that I would urge anybody to see. And then there was a Liechtenstein show down there. I always had the Rauschenberg show, who prefers the downtown space anyway. What they do like, what an open person like Rauschenberg likes so much downtown, is the fact that he's more exposed to real criticism, because there the artists really go, stand there, sit there, discuss the work of an artist, whereas you don't have the same thing uptown. People from downtown, who live downtown, artists and hangers-on, don't go, except if there is a great show uptown, so often uptown to see what the shows are. But to come back to your question, I settled the problem that I don't move downtown, that I've always been downtown. The change is the following, that I want to use the space uptown for more appropriate purposes. I want it to be devoted to graphics, and it's the graphics of my artists, the Liechtenstein, the Rauschenbergs, the Johns, to photography, which is developing very rapidly. I have something like 5 or 6 or 7 of the best photographers of the younger generation, like Ralph Gibson or Gossage or Eggleston and so on. And it's actually my wife who is in charge of especially photography. That's her great hobby. She is really the one who discovers them, who does the job that I was doing for the painters back in the late 50s. She's doing it now for photography. And then also what we want to do uptown is shows of drawings, for instance, group shows, or of single shows, say, of Rauschenbergs or of Johns. So the Uptown Gallery is very much alive, only that its purpose has changed a little bit. I want to be downtown most of the time, because I got a little bit sick and tired of moving up and down all the time, you know. Sometimes I had to go down and up again twice a day. That was too much.
But I suspect when young artists look for you, you're downtown, you're uptown, and vice versa.
Well, it's not so much.
What access does a young artist have to you?
Well, total. Sometimes I haven't got the time, and I have to say, come tomorrow, come the day after tomorrow, and so on. But I have total access in the sense that I will look at anything that a young artist wants to show to me.
But what is their opportunity to be shown?
For some it's in my gallery none for the moment, because I have a full complement of artists, but I can give them advice, which I often do, and sometimes when I really come across very good ones, I'm very sorry not to be able to take them on, but then I'm very glad to see that I found a berth in some very good gallery that I had advised them to go to. So I do still, I hope, play an important role with the younger artists, although I can't do anything with them directly.
How is the price of a piece of painting or sculpture determined?
Well, to begin with, there is a standard price for any young painters that appears on the scene. We know that the painting of a certain size will be just so much, let's say.
And what is that standard price?
Oh, I would say from $600 to $1,200, depending on size. Then, of course, the market begins to play a role. Paintings are very successful, therefore scarce, therefore much in demand, so the market forces play a role there, so prices do go up.
But when you talk about market forces, there's much talk that there are forces other than that conspire to fix the price of a painting, other than free market forces. For example, there is talk of collusion, bidding up of prices, placing rather than selling works of art. How much of that price manipulation has and does go on?
It occurs to a small degree, I would say. I do not indulge in it, but it occurs to a small degree, but it's minor. Nobody can afford to manipulate, except very rich gallery prices at a sale. Too large sums are involved in order to manipulate.
But doesn't that occur at a sale?
For instance, there is a painting of Bacon, that people want to manipulate for some reason. And that then in order to jack it up, there have to be, say, 2 bidders to jack it up to a price which seems appropriate, so that prices of bacon should remain high and stable. They would have to envisage spending something like $200,000 to sustain that effort. So it's just ridiculous. It can't be done. Nobody can afford it.
Are there regional differences in taste? Is the West Coast more eccentric, the Southern Rim more experimental, the East more knowing?
The production of painting, actually, important production of painting occurs only in 2 areas, and that's New York and Los Angeles, and perhaps the Bay Area to a certain degree.
And how about the collection of paintings?
They all now, with the communications being as they are, we are very everybody is familiar with what's going on everywhere else. But these are the 2 areas where actual production of good art occurs. And the art of New York and of California is really has distinctive features. They are very different.
How would you characterize the 2?
Just roughly, the Californians work a lot with plastic material. And with the space projects, whereas we, of course, have different conditions here, and therefore must be limited to less ambitious spatial projects than they are. But we do highly esteem what they're doing in California. And it's seen relatively little here, because we don't have the proper space to show them most of the time. There are some spatial artists that are incredibly good, like there are light artists, light and space, like Terrell, like a young woman, Maria Nordman, who surprised the whole world at the Venice Biennale with the piece that the spatial installation that she showed there.
What is your most prized possession?
Well, I have several.
For example?
I just have to say a few. I have to say the bed of Rauschenberg's, the plaster of the target with plaster casts of Jasper Johns, the Washington of Liechtenstein, just to mention a few.
Well, a very special thanks to Leo Castelli, who for the past 20 years has helped to change the face of modern art, both here, throughout the rest of the United States, and internationally as well. Very special thanks for joining us today. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein with All About the Arts, and thank you too, audience, for being with us.